Okay, drag 'em.
Meet Jim Miller, observer for Seismic Survey Party 341, age 26, an electrical engineer. Jim has been working up to this new job of his ever since he got out of college 3 years ago. He started as a trainee and worked on every job in the field, learning by doing. Until today, he is a competent, well-trained member of the seismograph team. But let's have Jim tell his own story.
That first day, I guess I was mighty green. I thought I had the world by the tail. I was a graduate electrical engineer. My diploma said so. And I was pretty sure that I was already the successful young geophysicist. But it didn't take long to set my thinking straight. That first day, I discovered I had only begun to learn. The company started me in an extensive training course immediately, and I thought I was through with study courses. One of the big things that stuck with me in that course was safety. Yes, I was green. Safety to me had always meant signs like danger, or watch your step, or close cover before a striking match. But in this job, as I soon found out, safety is much more than a bunch of warning signs. The safety engineer showed me how safety is designed right into seismic gear. It must be thoroughly tested. For instance, the transceiver in this temperature-humidity pressure chamber. Will frost from below zero cold cause short circuits? An equipment failure can often turn a trivial incident into a serious matter. Designing and building for safety is actually just careful attention to a multitude of small details. Details that may seem unimportant, but at some future time might spell the difference between success and failure in the field. I once heard the phrase, "An unsafe business is an unprofitable business." It didn't mean much at the time, but in this introductory tour on the first day of my new job, the close relationship between safety and success became vividly clear. For instance, the swivel on the shot hole drilling rig. Drillers have been seriously injured when it backed off the drill pipe, fell free and struck them. A safety hook and chain prevents such accidents. Making this improvement is one of those small humanitarian details that is also good business practice as well. The design and construction of the shooter's truck is, of course, devoted to the safest handling and use of explosives. But the protection of the human needs of the crew are not forgotten. In the field, the purity of water is often doubtful. Keeping uncontaminated drinking water right with the job helps prevent sickness and resulting lost time. Even the truck body has a rounded contour and smooth fender lines to help prevent heavy jolts from brush or trees going through rough country.
Having been introduced to the field equipment, Jim Miller then was given an intensive course in the theory and practice of seismic operations. And of equal importance, Jim was also well-grounded in proper safety procedures. He learned the proper location of shot points to prevent damage to barns and dwellings. Explosives having a major part in seismic work, Jim concentrated on the rules for handling dynamite and blasting caps. For instance, a truck carrying explosives must always avoid heavily populated areas wherever possible. The bulk powder storage magazine must be well isolated from any dwelling or human traffic. The rule ignored most often is no smoking. A cigarette around powder is an invitation to death. And the tools used in powder handling must be made with non-sparking metals. Thus, Jim studied every phase of seismic operations before he went out to the field.
To me, searching for oil had never seemed like a job. It was adventure. But that romantic idea was quickly sobered when I met the crew of Party 307. Then I realized what the safety director had meant by men with an aptitude for the job. My first assignment was temporary helper to Mac, the shooter. I was in training to be an observer, and an observer must know all operations equally well. To Mac, handling powder was not just a casual operation. It was a ritual. He had a profound respect for explosives.
Gotta be as fussy as a doggone bookkeeper on this job. If you don't keep track of every speck of powder and every cap, there's hell to pay. Heard once of a young fellow who found a misplaced blasting cap. He cut it apart with a knife to see what it was made of. Of course, he lost the knife and 2 of his fingers. Yep, gotta be mighty particular. There are rules we've got to follow. You saw the way I hooked up the charge. That's regulation. And that tamp rod, that's non-sparking metal. That's regulation too. Now, when you put the charge down the hole, do it easy, with a slow, steady pressure. If you run up against a tight hole, go even slower. You've heard of the shooter who got too rough with a charge just a few feet down the hole. Left a crater you could hide a truck in. Not much of the shooter. I only connect the cap leads when I got a few feet left at the top of the hole. And I don't remove this shunt until I hook them up to the firing line. There are 2 things to remember. You want a good electric circuit. No shorts, no misfires. But you don't want current of any kind getting into the line before you're ready to shoot. It'll be too hot to handle. When I twist the leads together, I bend the 2 leg wires in opposite directions so the circuit won't short out just before I'm ready to fire. When you're handling powder, you gotta think before you make a move. Every time. There's no ramming and jamming in a shot hole. At least not while I'm around.
I certainly agreed with Mac on that subject. I could see how easy it would be to get sloppy around dynamite without realizing it. For instance, you often fire 2 or 3 charges in one shot hole. If you're not careful every time, you might forget and leave the firing lines connected to the blasting machine. But not Mac. He says that's just asking for trouble. Someday those firing lines might be accidentally hot. Then wham, no shooter. Mac follows the book carefully. Only way to stay healthy, he says. When the observer says he's ready, Mac checks the firing lines with the galvanometer to make sure the circuit's complete. He connects the lines to the blasting machine and waits for the order to shoot. Disconnecting those firing lines is an automatic safety habit. From the moment he starts work in the morning, all through the day, Mac is as sure and as deft as a surgeon performing a major operation.
Hold everything. I got a misfire.
A misfire need not be dangerous if you follow the rules. But you must methodically check every foot of the firing circuit, from the blasting machine to the top of the hole. Usually there's a bad connection or a broken lead hidden by the insulation. This time, as usual, the galvanometer showed an open circuit, but Mac couldn't find a break above the top of the hole. The inexperienced man might try to pull the charge to the surface by the firing lines, but that's just asking for trouble. The correct procedure is to make up another charge and tamp that in on top of the first one. A second charge in the hole is the safest way to cure a misfire. So as I kept on with Mac, some of his years-long experience rubbed off on me. I gained confidence. I began to steady down, and Mac gave me more and more responsibility. Then one day something happened I'll never forget. I'd been doing the actual shooting, while for training purposes, Mac was acting as my helper. I had already fired 2 charges in the same hole. So, while Mac was tamping down the third, I dashed off to get the truck over with the water. Dashing off was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, I had forgotten to disconnect the firing lines. There must be a special saint who looks after a tenderfoot like me. Somehow Mac had just left the shot point when I tripped on the firing line. The explosion didn't hurt him much, but if he'd still been pulling those tamp rods, I would have been responsible for his death. The following night, we had a safety meeting. It was one of the regular monthly meetings that keeps the whole party posted on safety procedures. But at this meeting, I was the star. A detailed analysis was made of the accident. It showed how 2 careless actions can mount up into disaster. Mac had warned me over and over to disconnect the firing lines as soon as I fired. But I forgot. And I was too eager. The impact somehow closed the firing circuit in the blasting machine. By analyzing every detail of the accident at the safety meeting, I really learned my lesson. And so did the whole party. My next assignment was with Curly the driller. Here was a fast-moving, complicated operation with a high potential for accidents. But again, common-sense safety procedures had been carefully set up. For instance, hard hats for everyone, tight-fitting sleeves, and short gloves. And there is no room for a what-the-hell attitude in a complicated mechanical operation like this. Curly told me it is tempting to leave the mast up while moving from shot hole to shot hole. But that mast can hook trees or power lines and cause real trouble.
This practical experience, coupled with his studies at the company laboratories, was fast bringing Jim to a high level of usefulness. But Jim was also learning safety procedures in a way he would never forget. Such as the day they had to shoot near an 11,000-volt transmission line. Charges may blow the cap leads and firing lines up and across the wires. Then high-voltage electricity can travel back along the leads to the shooter and perhaps all the way back to the recording truck. But with carefully worked out procedures, shooting near high lines need not be dangerous. Nevertheless, the party chief should personally supervise the job. Primacord, a type of explosive fuse, carries the cap detonation to the charge. This reduces the length of the cap leads so that they cannot reach the high lines. The firing line is firmly staked down at the shot point. Barbed stakes are driven diagonally across the top of the hole to prevent the cap leads from being blown out. Nevertheless, the shooter always sets up on the opposite side hole from the high lines. And as soon as the charge is fired, he immediately disconnects the firing lines. In this instance, a twofold safety procedure. As in all things, the best way to learn is by doing, and Jim was learning fast. But he was also to find out that these dry land operations were only the beginning of his education. With the ever-widening search for oil now extending far to sea, Jim found that the seismic principles employed were basically the same. But an overwater survey has its own special brand of hazards. The seismometers must be rigged to special cables which hold them at a predetermined depth in the water. Nautical sice lines must be handled with care. If a man gets fouled in them and goes overboard, his rescue may be impossible. But as usual, the man who really has the added worries is the shooter. Under certain conditions, his firing lines can pick up enough induced voltage from the radio gear to detonate the charge. The shooter makes certain that the radio is off while a charge is being made up. The charge is attached to a large, bright yellow balloon, which supports it at the correct depth in the water. To avoid fouling the cap leads, the charge is launched through a special chute. Not until the charge is well away from the boat are the cap leads connected and dipped in wax to waterproof the connection. Each one of the shooter's crew must close his own switch before the shooter can complete the firing circuit. And not until this time can the radio be turned on with safety when the shooter is ready to fire the charge. There's one compensation in nautical shooting, however. It's a cinch to take care of a misfire. The shooter just hauls the balloon into range of his air rifle, cuts the cap leads, and sinks the balloon, charge and all. The dynamite used is a new type that disintegrates after a few hours in the water. Open water seismic work is also plagued by an unusual amount of static electricity in the atmosphere. Lightning often strikes these columns of water without warning. Under these unsafe conditions, the crew just knocks off. Yes, a seagoing seismic survey has a brand of hazards all its own. In the marsh and swamp country along the Gulf Coast, the seismograph party finds even more natural obstacles to be met and overcome. But here, seismic exploration has been phenomenally successful. Here, victory over sucking mud and snarled undergrowth is well worth the effort.
By the time I got to the marsh, I was certainly not the greenhorn I'd been that first day I joined the company. Sure, I was getting pretty good, but the very nature of marsh operations showed me I still had much more to learn. The terrain, the obstacles, the need for highly portable but still efficient gear, all these set up new technical and safety problems. Seismic work in this country is often more than 40 miles from the nearest telephone. Help or aid, 2 hours away by fastest boat. Each phase of the operation is almost completely isolated by the dense marsh growth. So it is up to every man to be doubly careful. Even the slightest scratch can have serious consequences from the highly infectious water and mud. And the marsh buggy. It is often the only means of transportation. But its revolving pontoons, its awkwardness, and its mechanical construction present real hazards to men and equipment. But, as always, it is the shooter who copes with the greatest danger. Besides all his other troubles, marsh gas often bubbles up around the shot hole casing, creating a serious danger just in itself. Because of this, the shooter must use special techniques to keep the gas from floating the charge to the surface after it has been tamped down. He wings it, drives in wooden pegs to secure it at the bottom of the hole. If he is delayed in shooting after loading the hole, he must run the tamps again to make sure the charge is still lodged on the bottom. And when he fires the charge, the shooter always stays upwind from the shot point, away from the gas. Marsh gas can cause serious flash burns. In dense undergrowth, his machete is a necessary aid to progress. But caution with these swamp knives is a must. The shot from a charge can often knock dead tree limbs to the ground. A safe shooter is the one who sets up his gear in the open. Man, it's tough just to exist in the swamp country. To all its natural hazards, add those of the usual seismic operations. The sum total requires well-trained men. Men with a high degree of safety aptitude. Yes, I was mighty green 3 years ago. I had some pretty quaint ideas about doodle-bugging. But today, I'm an observer, the boss of a party in the field, and I like the job. I've grown up a little bit, too. I know that this job can be successful only if every detail is carefully planned, if the keynote of the whole operation is safety.